think about the amount of change happening in the world around us, and we've never been in a moment with more happening in and around technology and how it specifically impacts business, full stop. And I've been doing the CTO role for Deloitte for a number of years now. It's never been more true. If anything, the pace of change is only increasing and increasing at that geometric exponential curve. So take a second and think about, in this last, let's say, 3 or 4 months, some headlines that if we would have said a year ago, we would have thought they were science fiction, or maybe past the scotch, past the hookah, we'd be having a good nighttime conversation. If it was a smaller room, I'd walk around and do it. I'll offer one just for my personal life. 6 months ago, I had a rotator cuff tear and a labrum tear and was about to have surgery and had a legitimate intervention with some colleagues who said, no, you have to go down and try regenerative medicine, stem cell treatment. So I tried the path. I went to see what it was going to be like. They said, we're going to pull bone marrow out of your hip. I said, hold on a second. That doesn't sound pleasant. They said, no. Your shoulder's going to hurt so much you're not even going to notice the hip. I said, oh, wonderful. Thanks for that. But I played golf 2 weeks ago for the first time since March of last year without pain and had a legitimate tear down my eye. Science over scalpel. That's the hashtag. On the personal front as well, I took my kids. I am in Kansas City. That's home. So trivia, the global CTO for Deloitte Consulting lives in Silicon Prairie, which is fantastic. It will host you some great barbecue and bourbon if you ever want to come by and see it. But went at Thanksgiving, my parents are Kentucky, drove electric car, fully autonomous, touched the wheel about 5 times on the way. While we stay with Elon Inc., anyone know what near-Earth object negative 143205 is? That's being tracked by NASA as we speak? The Tesla Roadster. That's blasting Space Odyssey as it heads to this orbit around the sun that was on top of the Heavy Falcon last week as it launched. Literally, and that's not the most impressive thing as we go to colonize Mars. If you haven't looked at the company Neuralink that Elon's the CEO of, it's literally the direct cortical interface, the implant into the brain to allow us to have, at the speed of thought, the interaction with artificial intelligence, which, Steve, I'm not sure if you're going to cover that piece of it or not, but very interesting. That's not fiction, that's happening. So the fact that there's a massive amount of change, and it affects every industry. And we're at this midst of the continuum of how do we respond. You have the hero's journey on one side, unprecedented opportunity for innovation and growth. How do we harness this potential to drive and fill in the blank? New customer experience, new core operations and how we conduct business. How do we think about product services offerings? How do we think about our business models and the boundaries of our industry and fantastic. The other end, we have this sort of Damocles, the existential threat of disruption. That's very real. I sometimes feel like we give it more credence than it's due, but it's very real, hanging in every industry, including my own. And so how do we respond in between the two? It's very true there's no such thing as too small to matter, but also there's strength and scale, and there's a message of hope behind this. How do we actually drive into the next level of business? So I'm going to do a little bit as we start broad and go in through some more tactical, practical tech trends, and then into the world of finance, what's probably most important for this group here. This view, there is no quiz. I realize it is busy. This is 9 years of tech trends research that we've done at Deloitte. And this is my baby, my team. I stand behind all of our experts in the field and out in the market with our clients. What we try to do is say, look at the next 18 to 24 months, because we think that's the pragmatic side of prognostication. How do we look in this budgeting cycle, next budgeting cycle? I sometimes call it Horizon 1.5. And I put this up here partly because I'm proud of the track record behind it. Mark's point was spot on about the timing sometimes not being quite right. 2010, top left, asset intelligence was us saying in the next 18 to 24 months, we're going to solve for the Internet of Things, sensors, embedded devices, smart objects. Directionally correct, the timing's taken longer. But there's no fake news. We haven't plotted this in a different way. These are all the things that we publish, and you can see the research. What I like behind it, especially if you're in the CFO position or the broader CXO suite, is that the pattern that starts becoming apparent, I think, helps guide the way, because there's so much change. And there's so many side initiatives, trends, topics, vendors coming at you, that sometimes it can be overwhelming. And I feel that. In every boardroom that I'm in, and the topic is broad digital strategy, digital transformation, there's so many different interpretations of what that means, and then specifically which of these kind of buzzwords and topics and trends behind us, what should be on first, how does it manifest? So one piece behind this slide, and why I thought it would be important to show you, is that none of one of these is the magic bullet. There's no answer, and probably most importantly is the what of any individual technology is only important to inform the so what, and the so what is going to be a collection of these. So it's the controlled collision between these forces that matter. And really our challenge collectively, what we do in Deloitte, help advise, implement, operate the future behind our clients' business is saying, how do we put these together in an actionable way? The theme of the report last year was the kinetic enterprise. I'm a computer engineer with an MBA. My wife's an English major, so it brings this night, conservation of karma. We come together nicely sometimes. And when we theme tech trends, that's her moment to shine. Last year, the kinetic enterprise, I liked it a lot because in one way it tried to embody that amount of kineticism, the dynamicism, the amount of change happening. That seemed really important as a part of the theme. But probably more important to it was we've got to move beyond just rhetoric and opportunity. So anyone go back to your high school physics class, my teacher was Mr. Kramer. Potential energy is fantastic, but kinetic energy is a thing that overcomes inertia and actually imparts force and generates momentum. And so the theme was about how do we actually shift into this, not just the so what, but the now what. How do we have confidence to take action and do it in a way commensurate with the time, expecting more incremental results that we can actually measure, understand that there's some unknowable unknowns we have to shift more of our investment budget behind, but do it in a way that we discipline and regimented behind it. This year's theme is the symphonic enterprise. I married up, by the way, for the record. So kinetic enterprise, symphonic enterprise, my wife helped me quite a bit with this. Symphonic enterprise, how do we bring these pieces together is really the emphasis of not the individual technologies, but that combination between them. The top and the bottom is really the point of this slide, because this is the patterns that started to form as we said, okay, it's too much to keep track of all the individual nodes that are plotting advances. It's my job, it's hard for me, I'm surrounded by a fantastic team. I empathize with everyone that's, especially the CIOs in the room. This is the bane of our collective existence. How do we make sense of this amount of change? The things around the top and the bottom are those macro forces. So digital is a big topic. I was the global leader of Deloitte Digital. We launched it about 6.5 years ago. When we launched Deloitte Digital, so much of the mindset was about digital equals marketing, digital equals customer, digital equals the channel of social mobile web. And our point at the time, and I think it's proven out to be especially true, was that digital needs to be digital enterprise as much as digital experience, digital customer. So specifically, how do we apply the same concepts into finance and supply chain and HR and the other corporate functions? And broadly, digital into the business at large. We presented it out, and the analysts that we brought together in the media said, what hubris for Deloitte? Why would you want to trade off of your heritage as being the leading professional services firm driving big institutional programs and projects? That's the least sexy thing we can think. You should have some really nice separate name. And we said, no, the point of it is we have to be able to imagine tomorrow, but get there from today, and it's all of this together. And I think that's the point of digital, how it's played out. Some of the concepts in the top are certainly still front and center. Human-centered design, we call it user empowerment, user engagement. I mean, that is being applied into every business, but the broader lens, not just within customer, clearly. The fact that we have analytics, data and analytics, and that story has shifted from the noun of the data and the techniques that we had for the backwards-looking view, the dashboard, the historical reporting, into this great and exciting land of predictive and prescriptive analytics, not just passive of what happened or maybe what's happening, but the active tense of what is going to happen, what should I do about it, and how do I have that happening autonomously on my behalf? So that represents that middle on the top. Cyber. For the first few years, we had cyber as a separate topic. We said cyber deserved its own trend. It's so important. And in those terms, it was security and privacy is the real emphasis. Even back then, it was saying, listen, and let's not just think about protection and how to secure, but the broader, more important dialogue is how do we then have vigilance? So if something happens, we know about it. We're learning from what others in industry and government around the globe. How can that inform our cyber intelligence response? And then resilience. If something happens, what do we do? We find that still the vast majority of spend, and it's probably underfunded at that, is in the secure bucket, and not enough is happening in the resilience and the vigilance piece. But the broader point of cyber being its own thing, 4 or 5 years ago, we said, no. We have to embed cyber, and now more broadly, risk, into every trend. It's not something else. It can't be thought of as something else. How do we have it so it's a strategic conversation, not compliance-driven, but actually driving toward understandable and acceptable risk? And it's not just security and privacy, but it's security and privacy and regulatory and compliance and operational risk and financial risk and reputational risk. which is interesting. One of the plots on this page is the social impact of exponentials. What is the ethics and morality of going down certain paths? And that comes up a lot today because of automation, only one dimension of the future of work, but an important one that's in that. So the fact that cyber has become embedded in every topic that we talk about, I think is really important. The bottom here, the fact that cloud looks like the smallest might seem ironic. In fact, it's the most pervasive across the others. We wanted to call it out as its own macro force. So there's no emphasis by the relative volume here, but it's certainly one of those. And in 2010, the trend was the cloud revolution, and even then it's not because of just efficiency and cost. It's about this is the foundation for business performance and innovation and growth, and that's certainly played out. Now, the two that might wrinkle the eyebrow or furrow the brow would be the fact that the business of IT is such a big plotting on this. And really what it's saying is that the way that we prioritize, the way that we budget, certainly the way we operate and deliver behind the technology promise, the way we built it and been doing it for a long time is not enough for today. So if the idea of the right speed of IT, the only right speed is faster, and we need to equip ourselves with a different talent, an org model, and delivery model, and expectation for return than we've ever had before. The good news is there's a great amount of gain we can have from some of these bottom-up investments. Mark hit on some of them on the infrastructure and platform and the app side. But it's also us elevating the role of CIO and CTO and saying the expectation of what we need out of our broader tech investment and spend has to be different than today. And this one's been empowering for a lot of CIOs. For some CIOs, it makes them nervous because we're certainly shifting what's been an age-old kind of the focus on operational efficiency and just keeping the lights on. That's not enough. I was with a client a few weeks ago. This is 90% of my budget's on maintenance, and the business thinks they're paying by 130%. I don't know if that sounds familiar or not, but that's more common than not. And then the fact that in the bottom right, the core bucket. And this is the one where I think a lot of times early on, when we say, hey, Deloitte's going to come in and do a tech trends presentation, the expectation is it's going to be a parade of shiny objects. And it might be interesting for an hour or two, and then we'll go back to our day jobs. The fact that we've embedded this idea of core, and how do we think about our assets that we have today? How do we think about technical debt? How many of you use technical debt as a term in your organizations? I don't see a lot of hands. That's interesting. Especially so to go back and talk to your CIOs, our definition of technical debt is basically the cost of the investments and the ongoing implication to our ability to respond to market conditions. So it's basically all the way up the stack. It can be infrastructure, it could be applications, it could be data. But how do we quantify what we're paying down because it hasn't aged particularly well? Mark's quote of 20 years is the average IT legacy. That's actually, I think, somewhat conservative. I think it's probably older than that in most shops. So the idea would be, can we measure what we're paying in ongoing maintenance and how that's holding us back? And many of our clients actually have a dollar amount behind it. By the way, there's three types of technical debt. There's malfeasance, which is maybe the first thing you think about, which is bad consultants and bad developers and bad architects that implemented shoddy solutions. Very small percentage of technical debt is that. The vast majority is what I call misfeasance. The right thing to do at the time, perfectly justified, and we said, we'll come back in a later release and we'll fix it. Or we know that that's an issue, but it's the right thing because we have a real pressure to go and hit the market and make the change, whatever it might be. And we're going to come back and we just don't. And we don't pay it down over time. Then the third bucket is nonfeasance. It's the exact right thing to do at the time. It just hasn't aged well. All of them add up to how's it holding us back, and can we quantify that in a way to actually justify some of these bigger initiatives that we have to do? So I like that all of these, they start telling a story. You can plot the individual trends into these broader categories. And then collectively, do we have a story of how are we investing to make sure all of this manifests into something more than just the carryover budget, how we spent the year before. So this is the view getting closer to finance. This is our view as we think of finance in the digital world. Some of the major forces, many of them carried over directly from that last piece. If you look at the top, these are probably familiar. Objectives of how we can do finance better. And I like how it goes from more transactionally oriented on the outside into closer to the business and closer to a strategic function in the middle and the top. Especially as we get to the idea of, can we move from just the predominant focus on accuracy and the rote repetitive tasks of the core function of the factory finance into this idea of generating insight, being closer and being embedded to the business and helping lead to new, fill in the blank on this slide, it says business models. That's a great proxy for it, right? This is the idea, can we actually move towards providing consultative insight into terms and conditions pricing, investment decisions, more and more and more, because the things that keep us most of our attention and focus actually start being handled by the pieces below. Also, the platform itself, we think of Oracle Cloud and what we've done with the new product set, it's doing the top side so much better than we've ever had before, which is fantastic. And it's only one part of the broader journey of how do we take advantage of the pieces in the middle and below to do more. So then if you look at the forces on the middle tier, starting on the left, this idea of advanced analytics and data and how do we manage data in a different way. I'd argue your most important asset in almost every client I'm with, they still struggle with some of the very fundamental foundational things that you need to have to not just operationally take better advantage of, but actually strategically build new businesses and offerings around. So master data, data management, data governance, data, just understanding, making available, and actually generating insights behind it. And the good news is we can do it with technology in a way that if we've tried it over the last 10 or 15 years and we found it was complicated, it was expensive, and it ended up being manual heroics to try to keep it in sync and in line, there's a better answer now. And it's being driven by some of the pieces on this page, especially cognitive on the far right. This idea of visualization, and how do we do better by creating self-service, do better by creating context, and delivering that insight into the organization in the way that it needs to be interpreted so it can be taken action on. We sometimes think of user-centered design, humanistic design, behavioral design. If anyone's interested, I did a debrief on it 2 weeks ago with our folks in our innovation practice, kind of the human-sided digital transformation. The point is, we often haven't said that needs to be an explicit focus of our data and analytics efforts. We've kind of left that at the side. If we implement ERP in a responsible way, we'll get the views that we wanted and expected at the end of that journey, and it doesn't happen that way. But it doesn't mean that the tools and technologies can't give us a way to visualize information with context and deliver it where we need it to be. So there's massive opportunity in and around visualization. In memory, instead of saying at best we can do aggregations and roll-ups, and then if there's any real deep analysis, it's going to have to launch a study. The fact that we have technology to allow it all to be there and be processed with transactional level detail and being brought together across different places. Technical concept, but it's a core and key enabler to allow that to happen. So hugely important in this broader lens of what we could and should do with finance. Process robotics and automation, we're extremely bullish on automation. The danger we have is there's a whole range of automation, and when you see RPA or see bots, some vendors are going to market with glorified scripting or glorified macros or glorified workflows that are very low return, positive return, but low return, because it's basically taking repetitive tasks and just scripting the actual interaction onto the screen, and hopefully that's going to generate lasting value. Turns out if you make any changes to the screen, if you make any changes to the logic behind it, it breaks and you have to go and fix it and think again. There's a more intelligent way to do automation, and there's a better way to think about what the returns should be. And as we apply cognitive and learning to it, it actually evolves in complexity and scope. And I love the idea of AI, machine learning, we call cognitive this bigger umbrella. It needs to be embedded in all of our core capabilities and processes. That's the future. That's what we have to aim for. Blockchain as the topic, assets, the exchange of assets, sophisticated rules on top of assets across industries. We moved from a few years ago, blockchain being a lot of confusion of just what it was, to some concepts being proved. Now we see it being applied across industry. So we have pilots up and running, moving into production in supply chain, in pharma, in manufacturing, in customer loyalty, in retailer, hospitality companies, in medical fields, so aggregated member fee across health plans, electronic medical records, government services, the provenance of artwork, digital rights and media. They're all looking to say, if it's an asset we can describe, how can we use blockchain as a means to eliminate friction in this path toward digital? So if you continue to think of blockchain just as cryptocurrency and kind of chuckle at the volatility of those public markets, the underlying point and the underlying technology is much more profound. but the net of it is where can we apply it to our assets? How do we think about it in our broader ecosystem? And then cognitive, probably the most important thing on this page, and I'm thrilled that the follow-up session is going to dig deeper into this and what Oracle's doing in it, because it's so important of how do we take machine learning, which is probably one of the most profound advances, instead of me having to actually code and script with a known problem statement in front of me, I'm going to apply broader algorithmic learning to be able to generate insights I couldn't think of before and I might never actually pursue because I've been so trained of where not to look and where the answer isn't that I've ignored some potential breakthroughs that suddenly the machine doesn't lie, doesn't care about my biases and the history of where I've gone before. And so this idea of how do we apply cognitive to some very specific things like doing ARP and into the broader finance function is huge. And then, by the way, on the bottom, not last, not least, but having a modern core ERP that's the foundation to allow these elements to be put together and deployed is essential. And if you're not on that journey, you need to be on that journey. And by the way, as you go past the application side, it's a great opportunity to say, let's look at the full stack. We shouldn't just look at it as we're going to do an ERP migration to the cloud. It's how do we re-engineer and revitalize our entire broad IT world. So specific example, logistics company we've helped on the cloud journey and applying it to core transactional finance, fantastic. On top of it, two things we want to call out. On RPA, especially for doing accounts payable, taking 1,000 people and starting applying 30% of the workload. So instead of having the 5 to 10 minutes it takes for every individual transaction to be processed, to have it effectively be done in real time and allow that entire staff to be reallocated to more strategic tasks and activities. Blockchain, business to business is a place to start it. Business to business payments, can we use blockchain to take out 30% of that cost, which translates into millions of dollars just literally to be reinvested. And in their case, the reinvestment is saying, can we collapse this division between finance and supply chain? This is the embodiment of the symphonic enterprise. How do they have one continuous view that moves into the actual operations of the institution and it actually plays out in a much more strategic way? So building the capability and proving it out within finance for a much more profound impact over time. I love it. But the point of all of this is, and maybe ironically so, as the CTO that spent most of my time about tech, is that the tech is not the most important piece. So this is a view of the broader, what does it take to become digital? We have a framework we call Digital DNA, 23 characteristics of what a digital organization looks like. And it really centers around how do we start building in our culture this idea of experimentation, broader ambition, moving quicker for more strategic outcome and intent. A lot of words in there, a couple specific examples. How do we actually embrace this concept of agile? Not as a hobby, not as a religious argument, but as we want to move faster and have closer accountability to business lines, hopefully better accountability to customer and outcome in how we organize and deliver our IT investments. If you haven't gone down this path, most of the best companies I'm with that said, we're going to fundamentally re-engineer IT, use this as one of the macro, it's not quite 99 points like Martin Luther being posted to the door, it's more like 10 commandments. This is one of the 10 commandments. We want to move to our IT organization, embraces Agile and DevOps. If you don't have that word in your vernacular, ask your CIO. If they can't help, then probably push them to be able to come back with a better answer on it. But it's basically saying we want to have a fundamental mindset shift. And we're going to invest in the tools and our people, so we're going to go faster and deliver more value that can be measured for our IT spend. I love this idea of broader design thinking, not new, but how do we put the humanistic side of it in there? And how do we bring user experience? How do we actually understand, not just in the market for customers, but our people, how they work, how they should work, how they could work, because of all this coming together. And design from that, not have that be the last thing on the implementation path that, okay, now we have to begrudgingly push what we designed into the user base and hopefully make it real. This idea of vendor to partner. I promise you, your partners want to be your partners. The folks that you have in your ecosystem, when we look to say how do we help add more value, it is co-investment, it is outcome-based arrangements, it is how do we help shine the light, be the shaman of where we think your industry's going, your company needs to go, and actually be the Sherpa that's going to sign up to get you there. And those two things, with all the folks that you have in your your landscape. Have that conversation of, can we shift the relationship and have that as a mindset that goes down, and so it's not a procurement-led activity every time, it's how do we get more out of that individual dollar we're spending. This last piece is probably the one I want to leave you with the most. I've been doing this for a long time when I'm with clients. 9 years ago, it was almost always with CIOs and CTOs. Let's come in and help evolve the tech agenda, help shape the roadmap of where they should be investing to be more relevant and elevate the role. In the last 2 years, I spend half of my time with CEOs and boards and kind of shifting this dialogue into broader awareness. And in the last 6 months, it hasn't just been come in for 2 or 3 hours, maybe meet with our tech committee if we have it, certainly meet with the management team and help us validate the direction we have and maybe shape it a bit more. It's become this interesting shift. For so long, we've said technologists have to speak the language of the business. I've been told that as a technologist my whole life. It's true, we need to do more of it. But we've seen the shift of the table being turned and say, how do we, as the business, speak the language of technology in a different way? And the best organizations that have gone down this path to truly transform themselves, take advantage of all the great things here, what Oracle has been doing, are the ones that have said, that is a CEO-level mandate we're going to push down. We're going to force our people to understand what all of this means, get out of our comfort zone of what we've always done, the institutional inertia of how we've always done it, and actually be curious about what we could and should do, but not just imagine tomorrow. We've got to get there from today. So don't waste the opportunity to have that light as we start shining tech fluency and make that a priority. That also needs to include, why do we need to modernize the infrastructure and underlying IT? Why do we need to re-engineer the broader technology organization to do more? And why do we need to challenge ourselves to be relevant in this brave new world where every company is a technology company, and the only thing holding us back is the audaciousness of our ambitions. So thank you for the time. Enjoy the rest of the good luck, Godspeed. Look forward to the journey ahead.